Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute precision.
Right, yeah.
It's almost like engineering, You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points at the screen and says, there it is.
It's binary. I mean, you see the fracture, you cast the arm.
Exactly. It's clean, it's comforting. We really like things to be visible, to be perfectly categorized.
Yeah, humans love categories.
We do.
Yeah.
But then you step into the world of assigning value, whether it's calculating the exact worth of a global trade network or mapping the invisible architecture of the internet.
Or trying to put a monetary value on the unpaid labor of a homemaker.
Exactly. Suddenly that x-ray machine is just broken. We are looking at a geopolitical and economic landscape right now that is honestly completely murky.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. But that complexity is exactly why we have to look past the obvious surface-level symptoms. I mean, we have to dig into the underlying systems to understand how a single policy shift in one country just ripples across the entire global economy.
And that is exactly what we are here to do. Welcome to the Daily Deep Dive, the 3D initiative of UPSC with Saurabh Kaushik. I am so thrilled you are joining us today.
It's a massive docket today.
It really is. Whether you are prepping for a massive meeting, grinding through your studies, or you're just insanely curious about how the world actually works beneath the surface, you are in the right place.
We're glad to have you with us.
We are going to look at India's rapid domestic economic expansion and see exactly how those internal growth engines are directly dictating its incredibly delicate maneuvers on the world stage. The domestic and the international are, well, they're no longer separate spheres. They are a single, continuous feedback loop.
Precisely. You really cannot understand India's foreign policy without understanding its domestic manufacturing targets and vice versa.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the massive economic announcement that just came out of the G7 summit in Evian-les-Bains.
That was a huge moment.
Yeah. Prime Minister Modi confirmed that the comprehensive economic and trade agreement seated with the UK is officially going into effect on July 15th, 2026. This has been grinding through parliamentary ratification since it was signed a year ago.
It's a landmark moment, really, because of the sheer scale of the bilateral wins. I mean, the immediate target is to take bilateral trade from roughly 36 billion pounds today to 100 billion pounds by 2030.
Wow, so almost tripling it.
Exactly. And to do that, the UK has agreed to offer 99.1% of tariff lines at zero duty.
Let's break down what a tariff line actually means in practice for our listeners, because, it sounds like a wonky trade term, but it dictates entirely what makes it onto a shipping container.
Right. So a tariff line essentially refers to a specific product category within international customs coding the harmonized system.
Okay.
Every single item you can imagine trading, from a specific type of cotton shirt to a frozen shrimp, has a code.
Makes sense.
When we say the UK is offering 99.1% of tariff lines at zero duty, it means essentially the entire catalog of Indian exports will enter the UK without any import taxes applied by British customs.
That's massive.
It is. For processed food, they are eliminating tariffs on up to 70% of categories. Marine products get a massive 21.5% tariff cut. Textiles, clothing, leather, footwear, these all go to zero duty.
There's a massive injection of competitiveness for Indian manufacturing. I mean, if an Indian leather shoe and a Vietnamese leather shoe arrive in London and the Indian shoe has no import tax.
It wins on the retail shelf.
Exactly.
Yeah, it directly stimulates domestic employment in India's labor-intensive sectors. But, in international trade, zero-duty access is never free.
There's always a catch.
Right. You have to look at what India conceded in return. To secure those manufacturing exports, India has opened up 137 service subsectors to the UK.
Wow. 137.
Yeah, we are talking IT, financial services, healthcare, education, telecommunications. This is the most comprehensive services deal India has ever signed.
I want to push back on the philosophy of this exchange a bit. A trade deal is essentially a two-way highway, right? We are exporting physical goods, textiles, processed foods.
Correct.
And in return, we are giving UK service firms enhanced regulatory certainty to operate within India. But if we aggressively protect sensitive domestic sectors like agriculture and dairy, which we did in this deal, while throwing the doors wide open on services, Are we fundamentally shifting our economic identity?
That's a great question.
Are we permanently cementing ourselves as a services-first economy in the eyes of the global north?
It is a highly calculated pivot. I mean, India has historically been very defensive in trade negotiations, largely because agriculture and dairy employ hundreds of millions of people.
Right, their livelihoods would be devastated by cheap European imports.
Exactly. CETA protects those people. But by opening 137 service subsectors, India is actively leveraging its comparative advantage, which is its highly skilled English-speaking workforce.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It's an acknowledgement that while we want to build our manufacturing base, our most powerful, immediate bargaining chip is our service economy.
And there is a specific provision within this deal that directly impacts that workforce, specifically the Double Contribution Convention, or DCC.
Oh, this is a life-changing regulatory shift for labor mobility.
Yeah.
Under the DCC, Indian professionals on temporary assignments in the UK are exempt from dual Social Security contributions. Right now, there are over 75,000 Indian professionals across 900 companies operating in the UK.
Because previously, if an Indian IT firm sent you to London to deploy a software system for 2 years, you were legally required to pay a portion of your salary into the UK Social Security system.
Yeah. No.
But you were never going to retire in the UK, so you were never going to claim those pension or healthcare benefits. It was just a sunk cost. It functioned basically as a penalty tax on Indian talent.
Exactly. It made Indian firms less competitive because they had to factor those lost wages into their project bids. The new DCC agreement completely eliminates that requirement for temporary workers.
That's huge for those workers.
And it extends the exemption period from 3 years to a full 5 years. That keeps that capital directly in the pockets of Indian professionals and firms.
Okay, let's unpack this next part. If we are opening up these massive zero-tariff export lanes to the UK, our domestic manufacturing engines have to actually have the capacity to fill those cargo ships.
They do.
And when we look at the latest domestic production numbers, the sector leading the charge isn't textiles or footwear, it's actually defense.
Yeah, the production numbers released by the Ministry of Defense for the 2025-26 financial year represent a structural paradigm shift.
Tell me about it.
India's defense production hit an all-time record of 1.78 lakh crore rupees. 2 years ago, it was 1.09 lakh crore.
That is a staggering acceleration.
It really is.
And it's not just for our own military, right? Defense exports crossed 23,500 crore rupees. That's a 40% year-on-year increase. We're acting like a local garage that's suddenly morphed into a global auto manufacturer.
That's a good way to put it.
But how did we engineer that spike? Is this just a byproduct of global conflicts driving up the demand for artillery shells everywhere? Or is there a specific mechanism at work here?
Well, global conflict certainly creates a seller's market, but the foundation here was built through deliberate policy architecture. You have the PLI, the production-linked incentive schemes.
Let's unpack the PLI for a second because it gets thrown around a lot. How does it actually force a company to produce more?
The PLI is essentially a cashback program for manufacturing. The government sets a baseline for production. If a company manufactures goods above that baseline within India, the government pays them a direct financial incentive.
Like a percentage of those incremental sales.
Exactly. It fundamentally changes the math for private capital. It lowers their risk and makes it highly profitable to scale up assembly lines domestically rather than importing finished systems.
And alongside the PLI, we have the Defense Procurement Procedure and the IDX initiative.
Yes, the DPP enforces positive indigenization lists.
What does that mean?
The government literally publishes lists of hundreds of defense components and explicitly bans their import. If the military wants them, they must buy them from Indian companies.
Wow, so it forces the domestic market.
Yeah. And IDEX, which is Innovations for Defense Excellence, brings agile, deep tech startups into the military supply chain to build the components the legacy players can't.
Which explains why it's not just the traditional state-owned giants anymore. Yes, Hindustan Aeronautics and Farad Electronics are still producing massive volume, but the combined output of private sector players, Tata Advanced Systems, L&T Defense, Adani Defense doubled in just 3 years.
That public-private synergy is what makes this sustainable. Historically, India was locked into a defensive posture as the world's largest importer of arms.
We were just buying everything.
We were a passive consumer of security. Today, by exporting indigenous systems to over 100 country systems that have been battle-tested in scenarios like Operation Sindor, India is becoming an active, indispensable node in global security supply chains.
But whether you are manufacturing artillery systems for export or processing textiles for the UK, Modern manufacturing demands immense amounts of energy.
Absolutely.
And if India wants to sell its goods to premium, highly regulated markets in the West, that energy has to be clean. Which naturally brings us to the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy's latest launch, the Green Hydrogen Certification Portal.
This portal is attempting to solve a critical bottleneck in India's energy export ambitions.
Okay, let's hear it.
India has set a target under the National Green Hydrogen Mission to produce 5 million metric tons per annum by 2030. But the physical production of the gas isn't actually the hardest part.
No.
No, what's fascinating here is that the hardest part is proving it.
Just to level set on the chemistry for a second, green hydrogen is produced by splitting water molecules, H2O, into hydrogen and oxygen using a process called electrolysis.
Right.
But to be classified as green, the electricity powering that electrolyzer must come from renewable sources like solar or wind, resulting in zero direct carbon emissions.
Correct. But premium export markets like the European Union, Japan, and South Korea have extremely stringent sustainability mandates.
They won't just take our word for it.
Exactly. They are willing to pay a premium for green hydrogen to decarbonize their own steel and chemical industries. However, they will not buy a single drop of it without cryptographic, globally recognized proof that the hydrogen meets specific emission thresholds.
Which is expected to be capped at 2 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of hydrogen.
Yes, that's the expected cap.
You know, I look at this exactly like an organic food label. You can grow the most beautiful pesticide-free tomatoes in your own backyard. You know they are organic.
Yeah.
But if you try to sell them to a premium grocery store chain without that official government-verified organic sticker on the crate, they won't even let your truck into the loading dock.
That is a perfect analogy. The portal generates that sticker. But the mathematics behind the certification are incredibly complex because it relies on life cycle emissions accounting.
Explain that concept. Because if my electrolyzer is running on pure solar power, how could my hydrogen possibly have any carbon footprint?
Because the concept of well-to-gate life cycle emissions tracks the carbon debt of the entire supply chain, not just the moment the water splits.
Okay.
Think about the solar panels themselves. If those panels were manufactured in a factory powered by a highly polluting coal grid, the carbon emitted to create the panels is factored into the footprint of the energy they produce.
Oh, wow, they go that far back.
They do. You have to account for the carbon intensity of the renewable equipment manufacturing, the transportation of the water, the compression and storage of the gas. The Green Hydrogen Certification Portal acts as a unified digital ledger to track, audit, and cryptographically verify that entire life cycle so European buyers can trust the product.
It's fascinating. We are essentially creating a trusted, verifiable digital identity for a physical molecule of gas.
It's incredible.
And what's wild is that the government is applying that exact same logic right now, creating verifiable digital identities to manage its own citizens. The Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology just announced the integration of family ID systems onto the DigiLocker platform.
This is a monumental expansion of India's digital public infrastructure. MEDI has integrated state-level family ID systems from Rajasthan, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, and Uttar Pradesh directly into the central DigiLocker app.
So what does this all mean for the listener? We really need to pause and appreciate the scale of what you just said. Between those 4 states, we're talking about roughly 37 crore citizens.
Massive numbers.
That is more than the entire population of the United States, instantly plugged into a unified digital infrastructure.
This represents the evolution of the JAM Trinity Jan-Dhan bank accounts, Aadhaar identity, and mobile connectivity. Aadhaar was brilliant at establishing individual biometric identity, but welfare in India isn't usually distributed to isolated individuals.
Right, it's distributed to households. Ration cards, housing subsidies, health insurance, these are family-level benefits.
Which is where the leakage happens, right?
Yeah.
If the state only tracks individuals, it's very easy for multiple people in the same household to claim the exact same benefit, or for ghost beneficiaries to remain on the physical ledgers.
So the family ID fixes that.
Precisely. By establishing a unique family ID that cryptographically links all members of a household together, the state gains an X-ray view of welfare distribution. It eliminates duplicate claims.
That makes sense for the government.
But beyond the government's benefit, the practical impact on the citizen is profound. It drastically reduces the friction of interacting with the state. Instead of carrying around a tattered physical ration card or a stack of birth certificates to prove your family composition, a citizen can simply pull up their verified family ID on the DigiLocker app and use it as instant eKYC.
The efficiency is undeniable. But I have to play devil's advocate here and look at this from a strict privacy standpoint. We are taking highly granular state databases, who lives with who is married to whom, who relies on what welfare scheme, and making them interoperable with a central platform.
It's a valid concern.
Where is the line between governance efficiency and mass data surveillance? When you create a single queryable digital space holding the family structures of 37 crore people, you are creating an extraordinarily potent profile of the citizenry.
It is the defining tension of the modern administrative state. I mean, the government argues that in a country of 1.4 billion people, targeted welfare is mathematically impossible without robust interconnected databases.
They'd say the alternative is the catastrophic leakage and corruption of the paper era.
Exactly. However, privacy advocates correctly point out that this level of data aggregation requires bulletproof legal safeguards. The system's integrity relies entirely on strict purpose limitation, meaning the state cannot legally use the family ID data designed for food rations to arbitrarily monitor citizens for other purposes.
Right.
The technology has outpaced the legal frameworks, and the friction between efficiency and privacy will only intensify.
And the urgency to maximize that efficiency is driving the government's newest initiative to tackle unemployment. Because, you can't have an expanding economy if you don't have jobs.
Yeah.
This week, Prime Minister Modi is slated to disburse 2,400 crore rupees under the PM Viksit Bharat Rozgar Yojana.
The PMVBRY is a massive direct benefit transfer scheme aimed directly at solving one of India's most stubborn structural problems, the informal labor market.
The numbers on this are huge.
The target is staggering, incentivizing the creation of 3 crore formal sector jobs across 30 lakh enterprises.
Okay, let's unpack this and break down how the mechanics of this actually pull someone into the formal economy. It operates in 3 components, starting with a direct subsidy to the employee, right?
Yes. Component A targets the individual. If you are a first-time formal sector employee, meaning this is the very first time your name has been registered with the Employees Provident Fund organization, the the government will directly transfer a 1-month salary equivalent into your PF account.
Think about the psychological impact of that. A 22-year-old gets their first real job at a manufacturing plant. Instead of just getting handed a wad of cash off the books, they receive an official government deposit into a retirement account they didn't even know they had.
It immediately anchors them to the formal banking system.
But what about the employer? Why would a small business owner suddenly decide to formalize their workforce if it means paying payroll taxes?
That is addressed by Component B and C. Component B provides direct financial support to the employer to cover their portion of the EPFO contributions, specifically for new hires in the manufacturing sector.
Oh, I see.
And Component C scales that up, offering incentives to employers across all sectors who hire additional workers above their historical baseline.
But look at the economics of this for a second. The concept of deadweight loss comes to mind. Are we just subsidizing jobs that would have been created anyway? Say a textile factory secures a massive export contract to the UK under that new CETA deal we talked about.
Right.
They have to hire 100 new workers to run the looms. They were going to hire those people anyway. Now, they're just getting the government to subsidize their payroll taxes. Are we genuinely pulling MSMEs out of the informal shadows, or are we just writing a check for job creation that market demand was already forcing?
It's a critical economic debate. The government's calculation is that the sheer cost of compliance, EPFO contributions, labor audits, formal payroll is the exact friction point that keeps Indian businesses artificially small and entirely informal.
So they stay small on purpose.
They hire 99 people off the books rather than 100 formally to stay under the regulatory radar. The PMVBRY subsidies are designed to tip that specific scale. Yes, there will be some deadweight loss where companies get subsidized for inevitable hires.
That's unavoidable.
But the long-term macroeconomic gain of transitioning millions of invisible cash-paid workers into documented taxpayers and active consumers in the formal financial system far outweighs the short-term subsidy costs.
It's an investment in bringing the hidden economy into the light. Now, while this Rozgar Yojana focuses on mass employment at the factory floor, India is simultaneously trying to nurture the absolute apex of its intellectual capital.
We need both.
We do. They want to ensure the ideas of tomorrow are built by Indian minds. Which brings us to the Farad Innovates 2026 Tech Showcase that just wrapped up in Nice, France.
This was not your standard trade show. It coincided with the Prime Minister's European tour, and it specifically showcased over 200 Indian deep tech startups to the European market.
Deep tech, meaning
We are talking about companies building next-generation artificial intelligence, quantum computing, climate tech, and advanced space propulsion systems.
And the outcomes were highly tangible. They signed over 120 agreements in Malheu's with European venture capital firms, corporate R&D departments, and universities. They even presented India's MANA AI governance framework to European regulators to show that Indian tech is built on solid, compliant foundations.
It was a very successful trip.
But, we have the brains, but do we have the capital? Why France? India is the third largest startup ecosystem on the planet. Why do we have to fly 200 of our smartest engineers all the way to the French Riviera to find venture capital for its own startups?
It comes down to the risk appetite of domestic capital versus foreign capital. European and American investors have traditionally viewed India through the lens of consumer tech.
Right.
They see our massive population and they fund food delivery apps, digital payment gateways, e-commerce platforms. Those business models have proven unit economics. You know exactly how much it costs to acquire a customer.
Right, it's safe.
Exactly. Deep tech, however, involves immense scientific risk. If you're trying to engineer a novel biotech enzyme or a solid-state battery, you might spend 5 years in a lab and fail entirely.
And burn through millions.
Yes. The Indian domestic venture capital ecosystem and high-net-worth individuals here are historically risk-averse. They prefer real estate, gold, or late-stage consumer startups.
So they won't fund the space propulsion systems.
Not yet. India has the engineering talent to build frontier technology, but patient capital investors willing to wait a decade for a scientific breakthrough to commercialize currently resides in Europe and the U.S. The showcase in Nice was a deliberate, state-sponsored attempt to pivot the European investor perception from seeing India as a massive consumer market to seeing India as a deep tech innovation hub.
We have to court foreign capital to fund our own domestic genius. And that strategic courting naturally sets the stage for the intense, high-stakes diplomacy that happened concurrently during that same European trip.
The G7 summit.
Yes. The Prime Minister held a deeply significant bilateral meeting with the U.S. President at the G7 summit in Evian.
The G7 week was an absolute marathon of diplomacy. PM Modi secured 7 major bilateral outcomes in just 3 days, maneuvering between the UK, Canada, and Germany.
Incredible balancing act.
But the meeting with the U.S. administration carried the most immediate strategic weight. They set a 90-day target to finalize the India-U.S. bilateral trade agreement, aiming for September. They advanced the Indo-USX defense ecosystem, specifically locking in the co-production of GE F-414 engines in India for our Tejas fighter jets.
Let's pause on the engines. Being able to manufacture the F-414 domestically isn't just about assembling metal. It involves the transfer of highly guarded, proprietary jet engine technology that very few nations possess.
It's a massive leap for our aerospace independence.
But amidst all this high-level talk of trade and fighter jets, the Prime Minister brought up an issue that is incredibly visceral and human: the safety of Indian seafarers in the Middle East. It's one thing to talk trade, but Modi went in and directly addressed the safety of Indian citizens in conflict zones.
It was a very pointed intervention. PM Modi directly stated to the U.S. president that the safety of Indian nationals must be guaranteed in any conflict zone, specifically highlighting international maritime corridors.
Can you elaborate on why Indian sailors are caught in the crossfire of U.S. naval operations? I mean, just to give some context on why this matters so much.
Well, there have been multiple instances recently where aggressive U.S. naval operations or the broader conflicts they are managing in regions like the Red Sea or the Strait of Hormuz have resulted in cargo ships being caught in the crossfire.
And the crews on those ships are disproportionately Indian?
Yes. We will dive into the demographics of the maritime industry shortly, but the reality is that Indians make up a massive percentage of the global merchant navy. When the U.S. Navy executes a maneuver to secure a choke point or pressure an adversary, the collateral damage often falls on Indian citizens simply doing their jobs on commercial vessels.
So what was the actual operational outcome of that intervention? Did they just agree to be more careful?
It was far more concrete than a diplomatic platitude. They agreed to establish a direct early warning hotline between India's Directorate General of Shipping and U.S. CENTCOM, the Central Command overseeing the Middle East.
Look at the mechanics of that. That is an incredible level of granular, pragmatic statecraft. The Indian Prime Minister negotiated a mechanism where the U.S. military must pre-notify Indian civilian shipping regulators about impending naval operations.
Giving us a head start.
Exactly, allowing us to reroute our citizens out of the danger zone before the missiles start flying. It is a brilliant way to protect our people without having to deploy our own warships into a U.S.-managed conflict zone.
And this emphasis on seafarer safety in the Middle East was happening against the backdrop of a geopolitical earthquake that had literally just occurred in the region days prior.
You are talking about the Muscat Accord.
Yes, the event that completely reshaped the backdrop of the G7.
This is arguably the most globally significant event we are looking at today. On June 14th, just before the G7 kicked off, the U.S. and Iran formally signed a new Nuclear Framework Memorandum of Understanding in Muscat, Oman.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is a monumental shift in the security architecture of the Middle East. And to understand its impact, we have to look at the deeply structural commitments both sides made. Tehran committed to immediately halting all uranium enrichment above the 60% threshold.
We hear percentages like that all the time, but let's explain the physics of why 60% is the terrifying red line.
Uranium in its natural state is mostly the isotope U-238, which is stable. To make nuclear power or a nuclear weapon, you need the highly radioactive isotope U-235. Enrichment is the process of spinning the uranium in massive centrifuges to separate and concentrate that U-235. Low-enriched uranium, used for civilian power plants, is around 3 to 5%. Weapons-grade uranium is 90%.
Wait, so 60% sounds like it's still pretty far away from a bomb.
That is the common misconception, but the physics of enrichment are nonlinear. The vast majority of the time and energy required to reach 90% is spent just getting from the natural state to 20%.
Really?
Yes. Once you have a stockpile enriched to 60%, the isotopic separation is mostly done. Getting from 60% to 90% weapons grade takes only a matter of weeks, sometimes days, depending on your centrifuge arrays.
Oh, wow.
By enriching to 60%, Iran had effectively parked their nuclear program right on the threshold of a bomb.
Which is why halting it there is such a massive diplomatic victory. And Iran is also sealing its advanced centrifuge banks at the Fordo facility and letting the International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors back in.
That transparency is key.
So what is the U.S. giving up to achieve this de-escalation?
The U.S. is providing a staggering $300 billion economic relief package structured over 10 years. Phase 1, which triggered immediately upon signing, includes the lifting of oil and petrochemical sanctions.
Which instantly injects about $50 billion a year back into the Iranian economy.
Exactly. It also involves the staged release of $180 billion in frozen Iranian assets scattered across global banks.
And crucially, the removal of OFAC's secondary sanctions. Explain how secondary sanctions work, because it's how the U.S. weaponizes the global banking system.
The U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, doesn't just punish American companies for doing business with Iran. Secondary sanctions mean that if a bank in India or France or Japan processes a transaction for an Iranian oil shipment, the U.S. will cut that foreign bank off from the U.S. financial system and the global SWIFT network.
It forces the entire world to comply with American foreign policy under threat of financial ruin.
Exactly. Lifting those secondary sanctions means the rest of the world can legally buy Iranian oil again without fearing Washington.
But we've seen this movie before, right? The JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, was signed in 2015, and in 2018, the U.S. unilaterally walked away and slapped all the sanctions back on. Why would Tehran ever trust another piece of paper signed by an American president?
They don't, which is why the architectural design of the Muscat Accord is completely different. It is a multilateral trap. It is not just a bilateral handshake.
Who else is involved?
Pakistan and Oman have signed the document as official guarantor states. China and Russia are formal witness states. The framework is deliberately designed so that if a future U.S. administration decides to tear up the deal, they aren't just offending Tehran.
They are simultaneously alienating Islamabad, Muscat, Beijing, and Moscow.
It makes the diplomatic cost of withdrawal agonizingly high for Washington.
It's a masterclass in diplomatic engineering.
Yeah.
And the immediate economic dividends for the rest of the world, especially India, are instantaneous.
We felt it right away.
Phase 1 went into effect on June 14th. The naval tensions in the Strait of Hormuz evaporated overnight. Within 72 hours, the price of Brent crude oil plummeted from the wartime high of $115 a barrel down to the $88 to $92 range.
For an economy like India that imports over 80% of its crude oil requirements, that price drop translates to an estimated savings of $20 to $25 billion annually on our import bill.
That's incredible.
It completely stabilizes our current account deficit. The Indian rupee strengthened by a massive 5.7% against the dollar in just 4 days.
And it translated directly to the consumer. I mean, maintaining strict neutrality on the politics here, you just have to marvel at the economics. On June 18th, the Indian government announced a 5 rupee per liter rollback on the price of petrol and diesel at the pump.
It's a direct result.
A signature in Oman literally lowered the price of petrol at a pump in Delhi a few days later. But this is only phase 1. The agreement outlines a strict 60-day window to negotiate phase 2, which involves capping enrichment back down to 3.67% and dismantling the centrifuges entirely. The deadline is August 13th. What happens if those talks collapse?
If the 60-day window collapses and the August 13 deadline passes without a comprehensive agreement on dismantlement, the entire architecture crumbles. Iran has explicitly threatened to resume enrichment to 90% weapons grade if talks fail.
And then what?
If that happens, Israel and the U.S. likely respond militarily, the naval blockades return to Hormuz, oil spikes past $120, and the global economy spirals into a severe inflationary shock. India is enjoying the economic dividend of the ceasefire right now, but you can be absolutely certain the finance ministry is frantically wargaming contingency plans for an August collapse.
And interestingly, with the immediate threat of a regional war in the Middle East temporarily diffused by the Musk Accord, the U.S. military is wasting no time shifting its strategic gaze back to its primary rival, China.
Which is reflected in a highly symbolic and highly controversial administrative move.
Yes, the Trump administration officially announced the renaming of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, Indo-Pacific, back to its historical name, the U.S. Pacific Command, or USPACOM. They simply dropped the word Indo.
Now, if you aren't steeped in military acronyms, changing a letterhead might seem completely irrelevant. But in the world of geopolitical signaling, names dictate resource allocation.
The Indo was added to the title back in 2018. Why was it added then, and why pull it out now?
It was added in 2018 to explicitly signal a broadening of the American security umbrella. By calling it the Indo-Pacific, the U.S. was formally recognizing that the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean were a single, contiguous strategic theater.
And it signaled a deep, long-term commitment to India as the anchor of that Western sphere.
Precisely. Reverting to U.S. PACOM signals a ruthless strategic narrowing. The current U.S. administration views the ultimate military threat as a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. Therefore, they are concentrating their naval assets and strategic focus entirely on what military planners call the first and second island chains.
Those are the archipelagos running from Japan down through the Philippines that hem China into the Western Pacific, right?
Exactly. They view the broader Indian Ocean commitment as a distraction from that primary deterrence mission.
It's like being removed from the title of a group project. We're still in the group, but we aren't in the name anymore. It's a subtle downgrade. And it makes you wonder about the viability of the Quad.
It does.
Does this make the Quad obsolete under the new U.S. administration? I mean, the entire conceptual foundation of the quadrilateral security dialogue, India, the U.S., Japan, and Australia, is the maintenance of a free and open Indo-Pacific. If the dominant military power in that alliance drops the Indo, does the Quad survive?
The Quad is undoubtedly facing an identity crisis. When domestic political priorities shift in Washington toward isolationism or hyper-focused bilateralism, these sprawling multilateral frameworks suffer. The Quad isn't obsolete, but it will likely operate at a much lower temperature, focusing perhaps on benign issues like vaccine diplomacy or climate tracking, rather than acting as a cohesive military deterrent.
Which means India has to adapt its own maritime doctrine. If the U.S. is pulling back its Indian Ocean umbrella, India's saga framework security and growth for all in the region must carry more independent weight.
Precisely. For the last decade, India has implicitly relied on the overwhelming presence of the U.S. Navy in the Indian Ocean as a stabilizing force. If the U.S. is pulling that umbrella back to the Pacific, India's Sagar doctrine must instantly transition from a diplomatic slogan into an operational reality.
We have to aggressively build our own global logistics network.
India has to rapidly build out its own independent global logistics network to secure the sea lanes that carry its trade.
And if you need to build a global logistics network fast, you turn to partners who already have the infrastructure. Which brings us perfectly to a major new pact with an old friend.
Yes, the Reciprocal Logistics Support Agreement, or RLSA, signed between India and Russia in June 2026. This is a fascinating operational pivot in response to the shifting U.S. posture.
Okay, let's unpack this.
The RLSA allows the Indian and Russian militaries to utilize each other's naval bases and port facilities for refueling, resupplying, and routine maintenance.
If you look at a map, the strategic value of this is immense. It grants the Indian Navy access to Russian Far East ports like Vladivostok, giving us reach deep into the North Pacific.
And the Arctic?
Right. Even more critically, it opens up access to Murmansk and facilities along the Arctic coast. With climate change rapidly melting the polar ice, the Northern Sea Route is opening up as a viable, massively shorter shipping lane between Europe and Asia.
Having guaranteed logistical access to that route is a phenomenal long-term play.
In exchange, Russian naval vessels get docking and refueling rights at major Indian ports like Mumbai, Korwar, and Visakhapatnam.
It is vital to clarify a common misconception about agreements like this. The RLSA is absolutely not a mutual defense treaty. It is a peacetime logistical pact.
Modeled on limited, right?
Exactly. Modeled exactly on LIMO, the Logistics Exchange Memorandum of Agreement that India signed with the United States back in 2016. It facilitates joint exercises, humanitarian relief operations, and long-range patrols. It contains no clauses that obligate India to join a conflict on Russia's behalf, or vice versa.
It's basically an agreement that says, if my ship is in your neighborhood, can I use your gas station to buy some groceries?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
But it is also driven by pragmatic technological reality. A massive percentage of India's military hardware is still of Russian origin. The S-400 air defense systems, the Sukhoi 30 MKI fighter fleet.
Regardless of Western sanctions, the Indian military requires a constant flow of Russian spare parts and technical maintenance to remain operational. But the diplomatic tightrope here is terrifyingly thin. India now holds active military logistics agreements with the major NATO powers, the US, France, the UK, and simultaneously holds an active military logistics agreement with Russia. How does the West react to this? I mean, how do we balance seeing Russian warships refueling in Mumbai while American carriers are doing the same thing in Chennai?
It will undoubtedly generate deep suspicion in Washington and European capitals. They will view the RLSA as India implicitly legitimizing Russia's naval presence on the global stage.
So what's our play?
India's diplomatic corps will have to relentlessly communicate the nuance, that this is an operational necessity for supply chain maintenance, not an ideological endorsement of Russian foreign policy. This is the ultimate practical operationalization of multi-alignment. India is building an independent, globally resilient logistics network that can function regardless of which superpower is currently angry with the other.
But, building that network and having access to all these ports from the Arctic to the Indian Ocean is completely moot if we don't have the human capital to actually sail the oceans. This brings us back to a point we touched on earlier regarding the safety of Indian seafarers. We're looking at a deeply concerning demographic trend.
The statistics released recently expose a critical vulnerability in India's maritime ambitions. Globally, India is a maritime powerhouse. We supply roughly 1 in 5 seafarers to the global merchant fleet.
So about 230,000 active Indian sailors right now.
Yes, we are the second largest seafaring nation on Earth.
It sounds like a dominance we should be celebrating.
We should, except for the internal composition of that workforce. A ship's crew is divided into 2 distinct classes: the officers and the ratings.
Okay, what's the difference?
The officers, the captains, chief mates, chief engineers, are the highly educated, certified leaders who navigate the ship and manage the complex propulsion systems. The ratings are the support staff, the deckhands, oilers, and catering crew who perform the manual labor.
And the economics between the two are vastly different.
Vastly. A seasoned captain can easily earn upwards of $15,000 a month. An ordinary seaman, a rating, might earn between $1,500 and $2,500.
That's a huge gap.
The alarming trend is that India's share of those highly paid, high-value global officer positions is rapidly shrinking. It has dropped to around 9%. Meanwhile, our output of lower-paid ratings is surging.
It's like producing world-class hospital staff, but only training nurses and exporting our doctors to other industries. Why is the pipeline for Indian maritime officers collapsing?
It's a combination of market forces and severe regulatory failure. First, the lifestyle of a maritime officer is brutal. You spend 6 to 9 months a year completely isolated on a ship. Highly qualified engineering and navigation graduates are realizing they can make excellent salaries in shore-based alternatives.
Like logistics and digital fleet operations.
Right, without sacrificing their family lives. Second, the regulatory body. the Directorate General of Civil Shipping, or DGCS, has completely failed to enforce rigorous training standards across the maritime institutes operating in India. The quality of education is wildly inconsistent, meaning many graduates simply cannot pass the grueling international certification exams.
And there's also the issue of a lack of cadet sponsorship, right? You can't become an officer just by sitting in a classroom.
Exactly. To get your officer certification, you must complete mandatory sea time. But global shipping companies are increasingly reluctant to offer cadet sponsorships to Indian trainees because the foundational training from those substandard institutes is so poor.
The massive blue economy opportunity cost of this failure is staggering. I mean, potentially $3 to $4 billion in lost hard currency remittances straight into the Indian economy. What does the Maritime India Vision 2030 need to fix this?
It requires an aggressive overhaul. The DG Shipping must ruthlessly audit training institutes. And most importantly, the global shipping industry is currently undergoing a massive technological transition away from heavy fuel oil toward green fuels like methanol and ammonia.
Which we discussed earlier with the green hydrogen.
Exactly. Indian maritime academies need to be the first in the world to train officers in managing these highly volatile next-generation propulsion systems. If we capture that specific technological skills gap now, we can reclaim our dominance in the officer class.
From navigating global oceans, we're going to shift our focus to managing regional rivers. Because asserting control over physical resources isn't just about the people in the water. It is fundamentally about the very control of the water itself. This highlights a major infrastructural standoff happening right now.
Yes, we are looking at a looming hydrological crisis. The government in Dhaka has officially approved the Padma barrage project. This is a massive engineering endeavor initially budgeted at 34,497 crore taka.
The barrage will be constructed across the Padma River, which is the name the Ganga takes once it crosses into Bangladesh, right?
Yes, and the site is located approximately 180 kilometers downstream from India's own Farakka barrage.
Now, to understand why building a wall of concrete across a river is a geopolitical flashpoint, we have to look at the timeline. The sharing of the Ganges water is governed by the Ganges Water Sharing Treaty.
Signed by India and Bangladesh back in 1996.
And that treaty explicitly regulates how much water India must allow to flow through the Farakka barrage during the dry season. But that 30-year treaty expires in December 2026.
The timing of Dhaka's approval for the Padma barrage is not a coincidence. It is a highly calculated strategic maneuver. Bangladesh has argued for decades that India's diversions at Farakka have severely restricted dry season flows downstream,
causing scarcity.
Right. They claim this has caused widespread desertification of agricultural land in their southwest region, allowed saltwater to intrude inland, and devastated fisheries.
So their argument is, if you won't let the water flow when we need it, we will build our own barrage to impound whatever monsoon flows we can get and manage the dry season ourselves.
Yeah.
They are explicitly framing it as an adaptation to India's Farakka diversions.
Which is a remarkably bold geopolitical assertion, but the consequences of this are ecologically terrifying. Think about the Sundarbans.
The world's largest mangrove forest.
Yes. Mangrove ecosystems are incredibly fragile. They survive on a continuous balance of freshwater flow, pushing back against the tidal saltwater, and they rely on the constant deposition of nutrient-rich sediment carried down by the river.
And Farakka already disrupts that sediment transport.
Right. If Bangladesh constructs another massive barrage just downstream, impounding more water and trapping whatever sediment makes it past Farakka, the ecological threat to the Sundarbans could accelerate exponentially.
And there is a looming shadow over this entire river basin.
China. Reports indicate that Bangladesh has held discussions with Chinese engineering firms to finance and construct the Padma barrage.
That adds a whole new layer.
It creates a complex trilateral water basin issue. China controls the headwaters of the Brahmaputra River in Tibet, and they are actively building megadams upstream before the river flows into India and subsequently into Bangladesh.
Water is the new oil, but rivers don't respect international borders. Is this barrage purely an agricultural necessity for Bangladesh, or is it a massive geopolitical bargaining chip ahead of the December 2026 treaty expiry?
It's absolutely a bargaining chip. Bangladesh is signaling to New Delhi that if a favorable successor treaty isn't negotiated immediately, they possess both the political will and the Chinese capital to engineer their own independent hydrological destiny. India must lead the push for a comprehensive, basin-wide management framework before December.
Let's draw a parallel here. between the flow of physical resources like river water and the invisible flow of global data, leading into a highly technical and controversial cybersecurity claim.
Pavel Durov, the founder and CEO of the Telegram messaging app, recently ignited a firestorm.
What's his claim?
He claims that the Indian government's recent blocking of Telegram wasn't achieved through standard legal censorship channels. He specifically alleged that India utilized a technique called BGP hijacking, which affected global internet traffic.
India's MeitY, the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, issued an immediate and categorical denial, right?
Yes, stating they used standard Section 69A DNLIP blocking.
Now, to understand the gravity of Durov's accusation, we need to demystify the back end of the internet simply. What exactly is BGP?
BGP stands for Border Gateway Protocol. The internet is a massive web of interconnected networks. BGP is essentially the postal address book of the internet. It is the language these networks use to announce, I possess these specific blocks of IP addresses, and here is the fastest route for data to reach them.
Okay, so how do you hijack an address book?
Well, BGP was designed decades ago and lacks built-in authentication. It operates entirely on blind trust. BGP hijacking occurs when a network falsely announces to the rest of the world that it is the optimal route to an IP address block that it does not actually own,
making it incredibly vulnerable.
Exactly. Surrounding networks believe the false announcement and update their routing tables. Suddenly, global traffic intended for Telegram servers in Europe is misdirected to a server controlled by the hijacker.
Let me make sure I have the mechanics of this right with an analogy. DNS blocking is like putting up a roadblock in your own city. You're telling local ISPs, don't let domestic traffic down this street.
Yes, it's localized.
But BGP hijacking is changing the highway signs globally so nobody can find the city. A car driving in Germany gets completely misrouted.
That is a phenomenal analogy. It differs completely from localized DNS blocking because it inherently causes massive collateral damage across the entire global internet.
Have we seen this happen before?
Yes. The most famous historical incident was in 2008. Pakistan ordered its domestic ISPs to block YouTube. They accidentally leaked that BGP routing announcement globally. It took down YouTube worldwide for several hours. Durov is accusing India of doing this on purpose.
Maintaining strict neutrality here. Why would Durov make this specific technical claim instead of just complaining about censorship?
It is a strategic escalation. By framing the Indian bloc as a reckless BGP hijack, he elevates the issue from a domestic compliance dispute into an international cybersecurity crisis.
Is there a solution to this?
The engineering solution exists. It is called RPKI, Resource Public Key Infrastructure. It allows network operators to cryptographically sign their BGP announcements. But global adoption is slow. Until we reach universal RPKI deployment, the address book of the internet remains vulnerable.
BGP manipulation is a perfect example of hidden back-end infrastructure dictating outcomes. And something similar is happening in India's financial back-end, the shifting role of the Reserve Bank of India.
The debate centers on the tension between monetary independence and fiscal dominance.
The Hindu published a massive analysis of this.
Yes, highlighting three massive data points. First, the RBI transferred a historic 2.86 lakh crore rupee dividend to the central government.
That's a staggering amount of cash.
Second, the RBI recently purchased roughly 9 lakh crore rupees worth of government bonds. And third, they executed massive forex interventions.
What is the macroeconomic concern here? I mean, this raises an important question. Is the RBI acting as a fiscal backstop for the government?
Fiscal dominance occurs when the central bank subordinates its inflation-fighting mandate to assist the government in financing its deficit.
If the central bank is buying government debt to keep yields low, are they still an independent referee, or have they joined the government's team?
That is the exact argument advanced by critics. When a central bank acts as a captive buyer for government debt, market signals distort. However, the RBI aggressively defends its independence by pointing directly to the Bimal Jalan Committee's Economic Capital Framework, or ECF.
How does the ECF justify this?
The ECF dictates that the RBI must maintain a contingent risk buffer, or CRB. The framework mandates this buffer must be between 4.5 and 7.5%. The RBI points out that even after transferring that massive dividend, they maintain their CRB at a highly secure 6.5%. This allows the RBI to argue it remains financially independent despite the record transfers.
It sounds remarkably similar to the U.S. Fed's quantitative easing.
It is. When the U.S. Fed bought trillions in government debt, they faced the exact same accusations of fiscal dominance.
Institutional boundaries are blurring everywhere. It's not just finance, it's military strategy merging with commercial Silicon Valley technology. Which brings us to a mind-blowing topic. Elon Musk's Grok AI in military strikes.
DARPA officially confirmed that XAI's Grok was used in targeting sequences against Iranian air defense systems.
We aren't talking about sci-fi Terminators, right? What exactly did Grok do?
Grok processed Elon electronic intelligence and satellite data. It synthesized all of this data to reduce collateral damage and optimize strikes.
It actually calculated civilian collateral damage.
Yes, Grok actively proposed specific munition types and calculated specific strike angles to ensure the blast radius wouldn't damage nearby civilian infrastructure.
We are talking about an algorithm calculating the exact angle a missile should hit to minimize civilian casualties. But this introduces an absolute minefield regarding the laws of armed conflict.
The LOAC is built on 3 pillars: distinction, proportionality, and precaution. Grok is essentially automating the math of international humanitarian law.
The U.S. military's defense is the human-in-the-loop doctrine, right? A human commander reviewed the AI's targeting package.
Yes. But consider the psychological reality of automation bias. Humans naturally defer to machines.
Who goes to jail if the AI hallucinates and hits a hospital? Is it the human commander? DARPA, Elon Musk.
That accountability vacuum is precisely why the UN has been deadlocked in debates over laws lethal autonomous weapons systems. The Grok case study makes it exponentially more complicated because Musk runs the AI company and currently leads the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. The traditional boundary line has been obliterated.
Taking a deep breath here, from algorithms calculating the cost of human life in a war zone, we turn to the Supreme Court of India calculating the economic value of human life in the home.
This brings us to a profound macroeconomic debate following the Supreme Court's 30,000 rupee notional income judgment for homemakers. The discussion is on adding unpaid care work to the GDP.
If included, what's the mathematical impact?
India's GDP jumps by 15 to 25%. We are talking about adding $600 billion to $1 trillion.
The notes mention Pigu's paradox to explain why the current math is so blind. Walk us through that.
If a man marries his housekeeper, the GDP goes down.
Because the work moves from the market to the non-market.
Exactly. Pigu's paradox highlights that GDP only measures transactions, not actual productivity.
The data from the Time Use Survey 2019 shows women do 7.5 hours of unpaid domestic work every day versus men's 2.5 hours. So the work is happening, the value is real, our spreadsheet just ignores it. How does a satellite account actually work in practice? Is it just theoretical math or does it change policy?
The UN's SNA 2025 revision recommends satellite accounts. You do not alter the core GDP number. Instead, you create a supplementary ledger multiplying unpaid hours by an imputed market wage.
Does it change policy?
Absolutely. When the finance ministry sees a satellite account proving that women are spending hours fetching water, spending money on piped water is no longer viewed as welfare, it is suddenly recognized as a high-yield infrastructure investment.
Properly valuing domestic labor is about recognizing the present. But if India wants to secure its future, it has to completely change how it values research and development. We need to look at the importance of innovating up to the frontier.
India's R&D spend is currently at a dismal 0.64% of GDP. This traps it as a technology adapter, not a creator.
Contrast that with China at 2.55% and the U.S. at 3.5%. We aren't even playing the same game. How does this lead to the middle income trap?
Developing nations grow fast initially by leveraging cheap labor. But as wages rise, you lose your competitive edge in cheap manufacturing. If you haven't invested in R&D to own the patents for the next generation tech, your growth stalls entirely. You are trapped in the middle.
And we are vulnerable to memflation AI driving up chip prices. It hurts countries that don't own the tech frontier.
The paradox is that India produces 2.5 million STEM grads and 30% of global AI engineers, but has a massive patent gap because private sector R&D is chronically low.
So what does this all mean? We've talked about importing defense tech, exporting green hydrogen, relying on US AI like Grok. The through line is ownership. The government launched the new 50,000 crore rupee ANRF. Is government funding enough? Or does the private sector need to step up to avoid the middle income trap?
The ANRF is a necessary catalyst, but the Indian private sector must undergo a profound cultural shift. They must abandon the safety of imitation and embrace the high-risk mindset of frontier exploration. Indian capital must learn to fund scientific risk.
That wraps up our massive terrain covered in this edition of the 3D Initiative. Thank you for this incredible journey through the June 18 docket.
It's a pleasure.
And to you, listening, whether you are a student, an executive, or just insanely curious, the dots between an AI in Iran, a river in Bangladesh, and a homemaker in India are all fundamentally connected by how we assign value.
We talked today about creating digital identities for families and AI algorithms calculating military targets. But as we increasingly rely on AI to organize our world, how long will it be until an algorithm starts determining the economic value of our unpaid care work, or dictates how we share river water across borders? When the machines start writing the economic treaties, who sits at the negotiating table? Keep questioning the world around you.